You can use the boundary surface feature in SOLIDWORKS to fill a gap between two bodies. This is a great solution when you want the gap to appear filled without really adding mass or additional solid geometry to your parts. Since we're trying to simulate an epoxy filling in this example, this method will work pretty well. Here, I have a simple assembly file consisting of two blocks, which we'll say represent the two circuit boards. I've exaggerated the spacing between the two blocks to make this a little easier to see. To create the epoxy, first, we'll have to create a derived part within this assembly. To do this, I'll go to Insert Component, New Part. You can see a new virtual component has been added to the assembly tree. I'll slow double-click the part and rename it Epoxy. Next, I'll right-click on the part and select Edit Part. In Edit Part mode, I'll begin a new sketch, and I'll choose the top face of the bottom block for my sketch plane. I'll convert entities to copy the outline of the block, and also create the on-surface relation. That way, if I make any changes to the block, this sketch will update as well. With the entities converted, I'll exit the sketch and go to Insert, Surface, Planar. I'll use the sketch I just created as the bounding entities, and click the green check to complete the planar surface. I'll repeat the process for the top face. I'll start a sketch, convert the entities, exit the sketch, and go to Insert, Surface, Planar. Next, I'll go to Insert, Surface, Boundary Surface. In the Direction 1 selection box, I'll choose the two planar surfaces that I just created. When I do, you can see a preview of the boundary surface in the graphics area. I'll leave the rest of the settings at their defaults and click OK. You can see the gap has been filled by the boundary surface. I'll change the appearance and give the boundary surface a kind of transparent epoxy-like appearance. I'll choose a cream color and increase the transparency. Now this might be good enough to represent a simple filler, but if you want to give this a more blob-like appearance to make it look more like epoxy, we can do that by using the Freeform Deform feature to deform the surface. I'll launch the Freeform command by going to Insert, Surface, Freeform. I'll choose one of the faces in the boundary surface and select Add Curves in the Property Manager. Next, I'll click several times on the face to add a few freeform control curves. With the curves in place, I can now click on one of the control points and use the triad to deform the surface. When the surface looks the way you like, click the green check. You can then repeat the process on the remaining three sides, and you have a pretty good representation of an epoxy filler. Now before concluding, I'd like to note that I created this part to serve as a visual representation of the epoxy filling. If I create a bill of materials for this assembly, the epoxy-derived part will appear on the BOM. But keep in mind, if I just wanted the epoxy listed on the BOM, I could have simply edited the table and manually added it without needing to create a part. Also, if you wanted to use the epoxy for a heat transfer study, the study would allow you to define the boundary as a thermal barrier, so I really wouldn't need to create a separate epoxy part file. However, this method is a pretty quick way to get a nice visual representation of the epoxy in the assembly.